this video, we'll look at how to mine an FTP website for fun and profit. So even though FTP websites have been there for quite a long time, there is no publicly available search engine which actually catalogs FTP websites and keeps a check of what is in there and so on and so forth. So this got me into deciding to probably make an automated program which can log into an FTP site, do a listing, and even try out some of the other commands and then save the output for later analysis. So in order to write the FTP program, I have chosen the Python language. The reason being very easy availability of client-side libraries and the fact that prototyping something is very fast. So first let me run you through the manual steps of doing it, and then we'll look at an automated program which does the same thing. So let's fire off the Python interpreter. So now we are actually importing the FTP package. So this is actually the client-side library for FTP. Now let's connect to an FTP site. So to do that, we will use the FTP package and then give the name of the FTP site. So this is an example of an FTP site. Now the client library is actually trying to connect, and it has successfully connected to the FTP site garbo.uwasa.fi. Now, as we all know, whenever you connect to an FTP site, you get a welcome screen message. Now let's look at what that message was. Okay. So there is actually an ASCII art which says Garbo, and then it gives you the whole welcome thing, and very simply looks like anonymous login is actually allowed. So now let's log into the site. So we could even have just called site.login without any parameters. I just did this in the example to show you that the username and password can actually be passed. So if you notice, we have successfully logged in, and this is a small kind of a text which the FTP server gives us back. It also says that your actions at Garbo are being logged. Anyway, so now once we have logged in, we would want to list the files which are available in the root directory of the FTP site. So for that, we'll use the following method. Site.retrieve lines, and then we will give the name of the command we want to run. So if you remember, the list command in FTP actually lists the files in the current directory. So once we have run this command, you will notice that we are getting a list of all the files and directories. So if you look at the left hand side, this shows whether it's a file or a directory, or even whether it is a link. So interestingly, using this parameter or permission set, it is possible to figure out which one of these are actually directories and which one of these are files. So let's say you had to write a recursive program, then pretty much you would look at the permission set along with whether it's a directory or a link or whatever, and then go into it and then do the listing further. So to keep this very simple, we are just going to list the root file system, but it is very simply possible to extrapolate this to actually go inside the directory and even list that, but I leave that as an exercise to you. So once we've listed directories, we can actually save this information and use it for later analysis. Now one interesting thing is many FTP servers might have been misconfigured. So to check if the server has been misconfigured or not, let's try and create a random directory on the FTP server and see whether it allows or fails. So if you notice that we do not have permission to actually create a directory on the remote system. Now, this is true for most of the FTP websites which have been set up for anonymous login. But interestingly, in my experience, what I have seen that a small fraction of those, 5 to 6%, unfortunately have world writability also on. So even though there are many such sites, I will not be demonstrating any particular site here. You are free to use this program and try out by yourself. Okay, so once we are done with whatever we want to do, we can very simply call the quit method to quit from the FTP server, and we get the goodbye message. So one part here which is very important is that the transactions which we have conducted have been very sequential. That is, first of all, we mentioned an FTP site to connect to, then we saw the welcome screen, then we sent the login information, in this case of an anonymous user, then we listed the file system, and then we tried to create a directory on the remote file system. And then finally, after running all these commands, we quit. So the FTP client library in Python actually provides us with the entire abstraction of what is happening behind the scenes. But it is actually possible to look into even what is happening from a backend perspective. To do that, you will have to enable the debug level on the client library. So let's do this. Let's actually once again go back and simply connect to our site. Now let's set the debug level. Debug level of 2 actually will show us what is happening behind the scenes. Now let's actually go ahead and enter our login command. So now if you notice, we are able to see basically the commands which were actually sent by the FTP client library and the response which the server side has actually sent. Right? So let's try listing all the directories once again. So if you notice, we have the command, type A, and then basically we are switching to ASCII mode, and after that, we basically say let's enter passive mode, and then we send out the command list, right? And then basically we are getting the response for the directory. So if you notice, this is actually the status message number which the server side is sending to us. This is the human readable string which is generally printed onto our terminal if we use the FTP program from, let's say, a telnet based client utility or netcat based utility. So what we have seen till now is that these procedures can be conducted programmatically and sequentially as well without having to manually intervene. So now let's try and write a program which will do this in an automated fashion and actually save the results. So I have actually already saved such a program. Let me just very simply run you through it. So the program is called ftpminer.py, and if you notice, we have pretty much conducted the same set of commands which we would do. Now the interesting part of this program is that it can receive a number of FTP sites in its argv, or basically command line input, and then it will iterate through each of these sites and try out those 4 or 5 commands which we just did on the Python interpreter terminal. So what it does is, first of all, it is going to actually check as to how many parameters has been inputted, and then it is going to iterate over all those FTP sites. It takes the current sites and it tries to connect to the site, right? This is the place, if you notice, it is trying to connect to the current FTP site. Now I've added some exception handling so that if it fails to connect, then it will just show the error and continue with the next site in the list. Now once a connection is done, then it is going to get the welcome message and print it onto the screen. Then it's going to try and log in using an anonymous username. Once a login is successful, then it is going to retrieve the file system listing, and then it is going to try and create a random directory, right? And then it continues. So actually go through the program. It is pretty much very simple and what we've discussed. Let me just run the program. So let's give it two websites. Oops. Let's actually give it securitytube.net. Actually, let me give the FTP site name. And the previous site which we just tried out in the example. So now it is actually trying for securitytube.net. It shows us the welcome message, and then it's trying the next site, gives us the listing, and then goes ahead. So if you notice, what happened here was that the connection to securitytube.net succeeded. We got the welcome message which the server actually sent us, but securitytube does not allow an anonymous login, because of which this failed. So then it went forth trying the next site, garbo.uwasa.fi, and then here it actually succeeded in doing the anonymous login, and then it listed all the files in the root directory. It tried to create a remote random directory, but that creation was not allowed. That's it. So basically we have a very simple automated scanner which can go through a list of FTP sites and check out what files are there and what permissions the directory actually has. So interestingly, this program can be improvised more to actually store all this data which it is mining, probably into a Postgres based database or something, and then used for later analysis. And I mean, you won't really believe sometimes what people even store in their anonymous public directories. And hope you guys are going to have fun running this program and tweaking it. And well, that's all for this video. Download the code and have a look. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Thank you.